The crack of gunfire echoed through the canyon, startling a flock of crows into flight as Tessa Davis clutched desperately at the coarse rope binding her wrists. Blood trickled from where the fibers had rubbed her skin raw, but that was the least of her worries as the three outlaws dragged her deeper into the shadowy tree line that bordered the dusty trail to Silver Creek. "Keep moving, woman," growled the tallest of the three, a man with a scar that cleaved his left cheek from eye to jaw. "Your pa's got a debt to pay, and you're the currency." Wyoming Territory, 1875. The land was as unforgiving as the men who sought to tame it or exploit it. Tessa had known hardship since her mother passed 5 years ago, leaving her to care for her father and their struggling ranch. But nothing had prepared her for being snatched from their property at dawn, her father's desperate pleas fading as they rode away with her thrown over a saddle like a sack of grain. "Please," Tessa said, her throat parched from hours without water. "My father will find a way to pay what he owes." There's no need for the back of a calloused hand struck her cheek, sending her sprawling into the dirt. "Shut your mouth. Talkin' women give me a headache." Tessa tasted blood as she was yanked back to her feet. The man with the scar Silas, the others called him, seemed to enjoy her pain. The other two, younger men with matching ginger beards that marked them as brothers, appeared less comfortable with their task, but offered no objection as they continued pulling her toward the cluster of pine trees. "Boss says we wait here till sunset," Silas instructed. "Then if old man Davis still ain't showed with the money, we take her to the cabin and send him a finger as a reminder." Terror seized Tessa's heart. Her father didn't have the money these men demanded. $500 might as well have been $5,000 to a rancher struggling through the worst drought in 20 years. He'd borrowed from their leader, a man known only as Rhodes, when their cattle started dying, but the interest had ballooned the debt beyond any hope of repayment. As they reached the edge of the trees, something changed in the air. A stillness descended, interrupted only by the soft click of a rifle being cocked. "That's far enough." The voice was steady, low, and carried an unmistakable warning. Tessa and her captors turned toward the sound. Atop a dappled gray horse sat a man silhouetted against the afternoon sun. His broad-brimmed hat cast shadows across his face, but the rifle in his hands gleamed with deadly promise as he aimed it directly at Silas's chest. "This ain't your concern, stranger," Silas called, but his hand had already moved to hover near his holstered pistol. "Let the lady go, and I won't make it my concern." The rider nudged his horse forward, revealing more of his features: a strong jaw darkened by several days' worth of stubble, eyes the color of a storm cloud, and shoulders that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. "You're outnumbered, mister," one of the ginger-bearded brothers warned. The stranger didn't flinch. "Maybe, but your friend there will be dead before his gun clears leather. Who wants to be second?" Tessa felt Silas's grip on her arm tighten painfully. "We've got business with this woman. Her daddy owes money." "Then take it up with her father," the man replied, his rifle unwavering. "A debt doesn't give you the right to manhandle a lady." For a moment, no one moved. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Tessa could hear her heart pounding in her ears. "This is your last warning," the stranger continued. "Release her and ride away, or make your peace with whatever God you believe in." Silas's face contorted with fury. "You got no idea who you're crossin', cowboy, and you've got no idea how fast I can put a bullet between your eyes." The man's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the words. "Your choice." Time stretched like molasses. Tessa watched the subtle shift in Silas's stance and knew he was going to draw. She threw herself to the ground just as the air exploded with gunfire. The first shot came from the stranger's rifle, catching Silas high in the shoulder and spinning him around. His own wild shot went wide. The Ginger brothers fumbled for their weapons, but the stranger had already worked the lever of his Winchester, firing again with deadly precision. One brother cried out as a bullet tore through his arm. The other froze with his pistol half drawn. "Drop it," the stranger ordered, and after a heartbeat of hesitation, the uninjured brother complied. Silas clutched his bleeding shoulder, face contorted with pain and rage. "Rhodes will hear about this. He'll hunt you down like the dog you are." The stranger dismounted, keeping his rifle trained on the three men. "I'm counting on it. Now get on your horses and ride. If I see any of you near Miss Davis again, I won't aim for your shoulder." The outlaws backed away, helping their wounded companion onto his horse. With venomous glares, they spurred their mounts and galloped away, dust billowing in their wake. Only when they were specks on the horizon did the stranger lower his rifle and turn to Tessa, who still lay trembling in the dirt. Gently, he knelt beside her. "Are you hurt, madam?" Tessa looked up into the face of her rescuer. Now that he was closer, she could see the lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting against sun and wind, and a small scar that cut through his right eyebrow. Despite his rugged appearance, there was something in his expression that made her trust him instantly. "I'll survive," she managed, wincing as she tried to sit up. "Though I'd be much obliged if you'd cut these ropes." He nodded, drawing a knife from his belt and carefully slicing through her bindings. As the ropes fell away, Tessa rubbed her raw wrists, relief flooding through her. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson, Lucas Lawson." He offered her a hand up, which she accepted gratefully. "Most folks just call me Luke, Tessa Davis." She swayed slightly as she stood, and his hand moved instinctively to steady her elbow. "You saved my life, Mr. Lawson." "Luke," he corrected with the barest hint of a smile. "And I'm not so sure those men would have killed you. Seems they needed you alive to squeeze money from your father." "A fate that might be worse than death," Tessa replied grimly. "Rhodes doesn't forgive debts, and he doesn't show mercy." Lucas's expression darkened. "Jasper Rhodes, the rancher from over Coyote Ridge way," Tessa nodded. "You know him. We've crossed paths." Something cold flashed in Lucas's eyes before he shook it off. "Come on, I'll take you home. Your father must be worried sick." He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. Tessa was acutely aware of his presence at her back, solid and reassuring. His arms reached around her to take the reins, creating a circle that felt strangely like safety. "It's about 2 hours to my family's ranch," she told him as they set off. "South of Silver Creek near the bend in the river." "I know it," Lucas replied. "The Triple D good grazing land it was," Tessa said with a sigh, "before the drought." They rode in silence for a time, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a soothing counterpoint to the chaos of the day. Despite her ordeal, Tessa found herself relaxing against the warmth of Lucas's chest. "How did you find me?" she asked eventually. "It seems like quite a coincidence that you happened to be passing by." There was a pause before Lucas answered. "It wasn't coincidence. I heard in town that Rhodes's men had taken Rancher Davis's daughter. I've been tracking you since midday." Tessa twisted to look up at him in surprise. "You were hunting them. Why would you risk yourself for a stranger?" His storm-gray eyes met hers, something unreadable in their depths. "Let's just say I have my reasons for standing against Rhodes and his kind." "You're not telling me everything," Tessa observed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "We've only just met, Miss Davis. Some stories take time to tell." As they crested a hill, the landscape opened up before them, rolling grasslands dotted with scrub, the distant glint of the river, and nestled in a valley, the weathered buildings of the Triple D Ranch. Even from a distance, Tessa could see figures moving frantically about the yard. "My father," she murmured. "He's probably gathering men to come search for me." Lucas nodded. "Then let's ease his mind." He urged the horse into a faster pace. As they approached, shouts went up from the ranch hands who spotted them. By the time they reached the gate, Thomas Davis was running toward them, his face lined with worry and hope. "Tessa! Oh, thank God!" He reached up to help her down, pulling her into a fierce embrace as soon as her feet touched the ground. "Are you hurt? What did those bastards do to you?" "I'm all right, Pa," she assured him, returning his hug despite her aching body. "Mr. Lawson here saved me before any real harm was done." Thomas looked up at Lucas, who had dismounted and was standing respectfully aside. "I don't know how to thank you, sir." Lucas shook the offered hand. "No thanks needed, Mr. Davis. I'm just glad I got there in time. Please come inside. You must be hungry and thirsty after your ride. The least we can offer is a meal and a place to rest." Lucas hesitated. "That's kind, but I should be moving on. Those men will report back to Rhodes, and it might not be safe for you if I'm found here." Thomas's face hardened. "Rhodes? That snake has pushed us far enough. Taking my daughter crosses every line of decency." "Pa, they said you owe $500, Tessa said gently. "It was $200 when I borrowed it," Thomas replied bitterly. "But the interest keeps piling on. He's trying to force me to sell the ranch. He's been buying up all the small spreads around here, using any tactic he can." Lucas's expression grew thoughtful. "How many men does he have working for him?" "Too many," Thomas sighed. "At least 20 gunmen, not counting the regular ranch hands. Why do you ask?" "Just curious." Lucas glanced toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. "I should go before full dark." "Nonsense," Tessa interjected. "At least stay for supper. We may not have much, but we can feed a man who saved my life." Something in her tone must have convinced him, because after a moment Lucas nodded. "All right. One meal." Inside the modest ranch house, Tessa washed away the dirt and blood from her ordeal while Lucas watered his horse and spoke with Thomas outside. By the time she emerged in a clean dress, her hair neatly braided, Rosa, their elderly cook, had prepared a simple but hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and the last of the smoked venison. Lucas sat somewhat awkwardly at the table, his hat placed respectfully beside him, looking out of place in the homey kitchen. When Tessa entered, however, his eyes softened, and he stood until she was seated. "You clean up nice, Miss Davis," he said, then immediately looked embarrassed at his own words. Tessa smiled, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. And please, after today, I think you've earned the right to call me Tessa." "Luke," he reminded her. "Mr. Lawson was my father, and a considerably more respectable man than I am." Thomas joined them, and for a time, conversation focused on the meal and neutral topics: the weather, the condition of the range, news from town. But eventually, the subject circled back to Rhodes and the debt. "I've been to the bank in Silver Creek," Thomas said grimly. "They won't lend me another cent, not with half my cattle dead and the other half starving." "What about selling some of your land?" Lucas suggested. Thomas shook his head. "That's exactly what Rhodes wants. He's offered to buy the water rights to our stretch of the river. If I sell, I might as well give him the whole ranch. We can't survive without that water. And you can't pay the debt any other way." "I've tried everything I can think of," Thomas admitted, looking suddenly older than his 55 years. "I even wrote to my brother back east, but I haven't heard back. Rhodes has given me until the end of the month. Then he says he'll take the ranch as payment." "He can't do that legally," Lucas pointed out. Thomas gave a bitter laugh. "The law doesn't reach very far out here, son. Rhodes has the sheriff in his pocket and enough gunmen to enforce whatever he wants." A shadow passed over Lucas's face. "I know the type all too well." Something in his tone made Tessa look at him more closely. "You've had dealings with men like Rhodes before." Lucas seemed to choose his words carefully. "You could say that. I used to ride with the law, learned quickly that a badge doesn't always stand for justice." "You were a lawman?" Thomas asked with renewed interest. "Deputy U.S. Marshal for a time." Lucas took a sip of coffee as though trying to wash away a bad taste. "Turned in my badge 2 years ago." "Why?" Tessa couldn't help asking. Lucas's eyes met hers and she saw pain buried deep within them. "That's a longer story than we have time for tonight." An awkward silence fell, broken only when Rosa brought in a small apple pie for dessert. "This looks wonderful, Rosa," Tessa said gratefully, eager to lighten the mood. As they ate, Lucas gradually relaxed again, and by the time the meal was finished, the tension had eased. Thomas excused himself to check on the stock, leaving Tessa and Lucas alone at the table. "Thank you again," Tessa said quietly. "Not just for the rescue, but for coming back here with me." "It means a lot to my father to be able to thank you properly." Lucas nodded. "He seems like a good man, doesn't deserve what Rhodes is putting him through." "No, he doesn't. My father's worked this land for 30 years. Built everything with his own hands after my mother agreed to marry him and move out west. She was a city girl from Boston. Everyone said she wouldn't last 6 months in Wyoming Territory." A fond smile touched Tessa's lips. "She lasted 25 years and never complained once, not even during the blizzard of '63 when we were snowed in for 3 weeks. She sounds remarkable, like her daughter." Tessa glanced up, surprised by the compliment. Lucas was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'm nothing special," she demurred. "Just trying to keep this place going since she passed. Most women would have given up and moved back east after what you've been through. Drought, debt, being kidnapped by thugs. Yet here you sit, more concerned about your father than yourself." His voice was soft with admiration. "That takes a special kind of strength." Tessa felt her cheeks warm again. "What about you? What brings a former U.S. Marshal to this part of Wyoming?" Lucas's expression closed off slightly. "I wander, pick up work where I can find it." "That doesn't answer my question," he smiled faintly. "No, I suppose it doesn't." After a moment's consideration, he added, "I'm looking for someone. Have been for a while now." Before Tessa could press further, the door opened and Thomas returned, bringing with him the cool night air. "Storm's coming," he announced, hanging his hat on a peg. "You'd best stay the night, Mr. Lawson. We've got a spare bunk in the hands' quarters." Lucas hesitated. "I appreciate the offer, but I insist," Thomas said firmly. "Rhodes's men might still be out there, and I won't have your blood on my conscience if they ambush you in the dark." After a moment's consideration, Lucas nodded. "Thank you. I'll leave at first light." That night, Tessa lay awake long after she should have been sleeping, replaying the day's events in her mind. The fear of her captivity, the steady voice that had cut through her terror, the security she'd felt riding home in Lucas Lawson's arms. There was something about him, something beyond his timely rescue that intrigued her. He carried secrets, that much was clear, but she'd also glimpsed a fundamental decency in him, a moral core that resonated with her own. Outside her window, the promised storm arrived, rain lashing against the glass and thunder rolling across the valley. Tessa wondered if Lucas was awake too, listening to the storm in the cramped bunkhouse. Wondered what he was seeking, who he was chasing, and what demons drove him to wander instead of putting down roots somewhere. Morning dawned clear and crisp after the storm, the air washed clean of dust. Tessa rose early, as was her habit, and found Lucas already in the kitchen, helping Rosa knead dough for the day's bread. "Good morning," she greeted them, trying not to stare at the unexpected domestic scene. Lucas's sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms dusted with dark hair. "Miss Tessa," Rosa acknowledged with a nod. "Your young man has good hands for bread-making. Better than yours, I think." "He's not Tessa began, then stopped at Lucas's amused expression. "I see you've met our Rosa. She's been with us since before I was born and has opinions about everything." "All good opinions," Rosa insisted, patting Lucas's arm approvingly before shuffling away to check the stove. "You're up early," Tessa remarked, pouring herself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. "Old habits," Lucas replied, washing the flour from his hands in the basin. "Besides, I wanted to thank your father properly before I left." A pang of disappointment struck Tessa at the reminder that he would soon be gone. Of course, Pa should be in soon. He always checks the south pasture first thing. As if on cue, the door swung open, but instead of Thomas, it was Milo Jenkins, their foreman, his face grim beneath his weathered hat. "Miss Tessa, we've got trouble. Riders coming, at least a dozen of them. Looks like Rhodes's men." Tessa's blood ran cold. "Pa, he's out by the fence line. Sent me to warn you when we spotted the dust." Lucas was already moving, retrieving his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. "How far out?" 10 minutes, maybe less. "Milo, get Miss Davis somewhere safe. Then round up any men you can spare. We need to know." Tessa's voice cut through his commands. Both men turned to stare at her. "This is my home. I'm not hiding while others fight for it." Lucas looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him of the futility. Instead, he nodded. "Stay behind me then, and take this." He handed her a small revolver from his belt. "I have my own," Tessa replied, moving to a cabinet and removing a wooden box. Inside lay a Colt Navy revolver that had belonged to her grandfather. "Pa taught me to shoot when I was 12. A hint of respect flashed in Lucas's eyes. "Let's hope we don't need to find out how good a student you were." They moved to the porch, where they could see the approaching riders, now visible as a dark line on the horizon. Milo had gone to gather the ranch hands, all 4 of them, hardly a match for Rhodes's small army. What do they want? Tessa wondered aloud, though she feared she knew the answer. "Revenge, most likely," Lucas said grimly. "And possibly to make an example of your father. Men like Rhodes don't take kindly to defiance." "But we haven't defied him, not really. We just haven't paid yet." Lucas glanced at her. "You escaped. I shot 2 of his men. That's defiance enough." As the riders drew closer, Tessa could make out individual figures. At their head rode a large man on a black horse, Jasper Rhodes himself, recognizable even at a distance by his distinctive white coat and wide-brimmed black hat. Beside him rode Silas, his arm in a crude sling, and the ginger-bearded brothers. The rest were the usual assortment of hard-faced men who did Rhodes's dirty work. Thomas arrived from the pasture, riding hard and dismounted in a cloud of dust. "Get inside, Tessa." "I'm staying, Pa," she replied firmly. Thomas looked like he might argue, but a glance at the approaching riders changed his mind. "Fine, but stay back." He turned to Lucas. "You should go. This isn't your fight." Lucas checked his rifle with practiced efficiency. "It became my fight when I put a bullet in Silas yesterday. Besides, I've got unfinished business with Rhodes." There was no time to question that statement. Rhodes and his men had reached the gate and were now riding into the yard, spreading out in a semicircle before the house. The ranch hands had gathered behind Thomas, Tessa, and Lucas on the porch, outgunned but determined. Rhodes reined in his horse, his corpulent face red with exertion and anger. He was a large man in his 50s, with small eyes set deep in a fleshy face and hands adorned with gaudy rings. "Davis," he bellowed. "You've got some explaining to do." Thomas stepped forward, his voice steady. "What do you want, Rhodes?" "What do I want?" Rhodes's laugh was ugly. "I want my money. I want compensation for my injured men. And I want that interfering bastard behind you handed over for what he did to my boys." Lucas moved to stand beside Thomas, his rifle held casually but ready. "Your boys were kidnapping an innocent woman, Rhodes. They're lucky to be alive." Rhodes squinted at Lucas, then a slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face. Well, Lucas Lawson. Long way from Denver, aren't you, Marshal? Oh wait, you're not a marshal anymore, are you? Not since. Enough." Lucas's voice cut like a whip. "We both know why I'm here." An undercurrent of tension flowed between the two men, something personal that Tessa couldn't decipher. "Thomas Davis owes me money," Rhodes said, recovering his bluster. $500 plus interest, and I've come to collect, one way or another." "The deadline isn't for 3 more weeks, Thomas protested. Rhodes shrugged. "I've decided to move up our schedule. Pay now or we'll take what we're owed in blood and property." Lucas stepped forward. "How about another option? I'll cover Davis's debt. $500, no interest." A murmur ran through the assembled men. Tessa stared at Lucas in shock. $500 was a fortune, certainly not the kind of money a drifting ex-lawman would carry. Rhodes looked equally surprised, then suspicious. "And where would you get that kind of money, Lawson?" "I have it," Lucas said simply. "Do we have a deal?" Rhodes studied him for a long moment, then laughed. "No deal. This isn't about money anymore. It's about respect. Davis disrespected me by sending his daughter to hide instead of facing me like a man, and you disrespected me by shooting my men." "I didn't send Tessa anywhere," Thomas protested. "Your thugs kidnapped her." "A misunderstanding," Rhodes dismissed with a wave of his bejeweled hand. "The point is, you've become a problem, Davis, and I solve problems permanently." His hand moved toward his gun, but before it reached the holster, Lucas's rifle was at his shoulder, aimed directly at Rhodes's heart. "Don't," Lucas warned, his voice deadly quiet. "Tell your men to back off, Rhodes." Rhodes froze, his small eyes darting between Lucas's face and the rifle barrel. "You can't shoot all of us, Lawson." "I don't need to, just you." The certainty in Lucas's voice sent a chill down Tessa's spine. "How loyal do you think your hired guns will be once their meal ticket has a hole in his chest?" For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Rhodes slowly raised his hands. "Easy now. Perhaps we can discuss this like businessmen after all." "Pa!" A new voice called from behind the line of riders. The men parted to reveal a young woman on horseback, her blonde hair gleaming in the morning sun. She was expensively dressed, with the confident bearing of someone used to getting her way. Rhodes's face darkened with anger. "Margaret, I told you to stay at the ranch." "And I decided not to listen," she replied crisply, urging her horse forward until she was beside her father. Her gaze swept over the scene, lingering on Lucas with evident surprise. "Marshal Lawson, is that you?" Lucas lowered his rifle slightly. "Miss Rhodes, it's been a while." Tessa looked between them, confusion and a strange twinge of jealousy mingling in her chest. The young woman Margaret clearly knew Lucas, and from her expression knew him well. "What are you doing here?" Margaret asked Lucas, ignoring the tension surrounding them. "Looking for your father, actually," Lucas replied evenly. "Though I didn't expect to find him threatening innocent ranchers." Margaret turned to Rhodes, her delicate features hardening. "Is that true, father? Are you bullying these people over a loan?" Rhodes shifted uncomfortably. "It's business, Margaret. Nothing for you to concern yourself with." "It became my concern when you dragged me out here to the middle of nowhere and promised we'd build a respectable life," she retorted. "There's nothing respectable about this." She turned back to Lucas. "Whatever my father has done, I apologize. Perhaps we can resolve this without violence." Lucas studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I'd like that, Miss Rhodes, for old time's sake." Rhodes glowered at this exchange but seemed unwilling to contradict his daughter in public. "What do you propose?" "First, you'll forgive Davis's debt entirely," Lucas said firmly. "Second, you'll leave this family and their property alone from now on. Third, you and I will have a private conversation about certain events in Denver 2 years ago." The mention of Denver caused Rhodes to pale visibly beneath his weather-reddened complexion. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Lucas replied softly, "and I think you'd prefer to discuss it away from your men and your daughter." A tense silence fell. Tessa watched the interplay with growing curiosity, wondering what connection could possibly exist between Lucas Lawson and the Rhodes family. Finally, Rhodes nodded stiffly. "Fine. Davis, consider your debt canceled. Margaret, ride back to the ranch. The rest of you wait for me at the road." "Father," Margaret began to protest. "Not now, girl," Rhodes snapped. "Do as I say." Margaret pressed her lips together in evident frustration but wheeled her horse around and rode off. The gunmen looked uncertainly at their employer, then at Lucas's steady rifle before slowly backing their mounts away. When only Rhodes remained, Lucas lowered his weapon. "Let's talk in the barn. More private that way." Rhodes dismounted awkwardly, his bulk making the simple action seem laborious. He followed Lucas toward the barn, casting a venomous glance at Thomas and Tessa as he passed. "What was that all about?" Milo asked once the two men had disappeared inside the barn. Thomas shook his head, looking as confused as Tessa felt. "I have no idea, but I'm not about to question a miracle." Tessa wasn't so easily satisfied. "I'm going to find out," she declared, and before anyone could stop her, she had slipped off the porch and was moving quietly toward the barn. "Tessa, don't," her father called after her, but she ignored him, driven by a need to understand what was happening. She approached the barn cautiously, careful to avoid the patches of mud that might reveal her footsteps. The large double doors were partially closed, but through the gap, she could hear voices Lucas's calm and measured, Rhodes's alternating between blustering anger and what sounded almost like fear. "Know perfectly well what happened to Sheriff Donovan," Lucas was saying as Tessa positioned herself where she could see through a crack in the weathered wood. Rhodes paced back and forth, his expensive boots leaving imprints in the straw-covered floor. "I had nothing to do with that." "Donovan was corrupt. Everyone knew it." "He was investigating you," Lucas countered. "And then he turned up dead in an alley the night before he was going to present evidence to the circuit judge, evidence that would have connected you to the stagecoach robberies." Tessa's eyes widened. "Stagecoach robberies, murder, what kind of man was Rhodes?" "Circumstantial," Rhodes sneered. "You couldn't prove anything then and you can't prove anything now." "I'm not here to arrest you, Rhodes. That part of my life is over." "Then what do you want? Revenge?" "Is that why you've been following me for 2 years?" Lucas leaned against a support beam, his face half in shadow. "Justice isn't the same as revenge. Donovan was my friend. He trusted the law, believed in doing things the right way. His wife still writes to me, asking if I've found out who killed her husband." "And you think it was me?" Rhodes laughed without humor. "I've never killed a man in my life. I hire people for that sort of thing. Like you hired people to rob those stagecoaches. To intimidate small ranchers into selling their land cheap. To kidnap innocent women." Rhodes's face flushed with anger. "What do you want from me, Lawson? A confession? You'll never get it, and without a badge you've got no authority here." "I want you to leave Wyoming," Lucas said simply. "Go back east. Take your daughter and your money and start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere far from here." "Or what?" or I'll make sure every piece of evidence I've collected over the last 2 years finds its way to the territorial governor, the Denver courts, and every newspaper from here to St. Louis. Lucas straightened up. You might avoid prison with your connections, but your reputation will be ruined, your businesses will fail, and your daughter will know exactly what kind of man her father really is. Rhodes's face contorted with rage. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Lucas's voice was steel. I've got nothing left to lose, Rhodes. Can you say the same? A heavy silence fell. Tessa hardly dared breathe, afraid they would notice her presence. Finally, Rhodes spoke, his voice a low growl. I've built something here. I won't just walk away. Sell your holdings. You'll still be a wealthy man, but you'll do it elsewhere. And Davis? His debt, forgiven, as you already agreed, along with any other debts you're using to squeeze local ranchers. Rhodes stared at Lucas with naked hatred. You're asking for a lot, Lawson. I'm offering you a chance to walk away clean, more than you gave Donovan. Another long silence. Then Rhodes's shoulders slumped slightly, the first sign of defeat Tessa had ever seen from the man. I'll need time to arrange things. 1 month, Lucas said, not a day more. And in the meantime, you leave the local ranchers alone, completely. Rhodes nodded stiffly. Fine, 1 month. He started toward the door, then paused. What about Margaret? She likes it here. Something like sympathy flickered across Lucas's face. She's a strong woman, she'll adjust. And she deserves better than building a life on other people's suffering. Rhodes had no reply to that. He straightened his coat, attempting to recover some dignity, and moved toward the door. Tessa quickly ducked behind a water barrel, holding her breath as Rhodes emerged from the barn and stomped back to his horse. Without a word to anyone, he mounted and rode off to join his waiting men. Tessa waited until they had disappeared down the road before emerging from her hiding place. She found Lucas still in the barn, sitting on a hay bale with his head in his hands. That was quite a performance, she said softly. Lucas's head snapped up, surprise quickly giving way to resignation when he saw her. How much did you hear? Enough. Tessa moved closer, settling onto another bale across from him. You've been hunting Rhodes for 2 years because he had your friend killed, Lucas sighed, suddenly looking tired. It's more complicated than that. Donovan was investigating a series of stagecoach robberies. The evidence pointed to Rhodes, but we could never prove it. The night before Donovan was going to present what he had to a judge, someone shot him in the back. The investigation was redirected. I knew Rhodes was behind it, but my superiors ordered me to drop it. So you resigned. I refused to drop the case. They took my badge. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Turns out a lawman who doesn't follow orders isn't very welcome in the U.S. Marshal Service. And you've been tracking Rhodes ever since, Lucas nodded. I followed him to Wyoming. Watched him start the same pattern here, pressuring small landowners, building his empire through intimidation and fraud. I was gathering evidence, planning to take it to the territorial governor. Until yesterday, when you found me being dragged into the trees, Tessa said softly. That changed things, Lucas admitted, made it personal in a different way. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection deeper than mere gratitude or circumstance. What will you do now? Tessa asked. Rhodes agreed to your terms, but I don't trust him, Lucas finished with a wry smile. No, I don't. I'll need to stay in the area, make sure he follows through. Hope bloomed in Tessa's chest. You could stay here, at the Triple D. We could use an extra hand, especially now that we don't have to worry about Rhodes's debt. Lucas looked surprised by the offer. Your father might not be comfortable having a man with my history around. I think he'll be grateful enough to overlook a lot, Tessa replied. Besides, you're not exactly what I'd call dangerous, at least not to decent folks. That earned a genuine laugh from Lucas. "You might be the first person in years to call me not dangerous, Miss Davis." "Tessa," she reminded him with a smile, "and I'm an excellent judge of character." Before Lucas could respond, the barn door swung open wider, and Thomas Davis appeared, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Everything all right in here?" he asked, looking between them. "Fine, Pa," Tessa assured him. Mr. Lawson was just explaining a few things about his history with Rhodes. Thomas nodded slowly. "I heard enough to gather there's bad blood there. Whatever the reason, I'm grateful for your intervention, Mr. Lawson. My daughter tells me you've been tracking Rhodes for some time." Lucas stood, brushing hay from his pants. "Yes, sir, it's a long story." "Well, I'd like to hear it if you're willing to share, preferably over breakfast. Rosa's got flapjacks on the stove and this calls for a celebration." "I've offered Mr. Lawson a job," Tessa interjected, ignoring Lucas's startled look. "At least temporarily. We could use the help, and he needs to stay in the area to ensure Rhodes keeps his word." Thomas considered this, then nodded. "That's not a bad idea. We're short-handed as it is, and another gun around the place wouldn't hurt until we're sure Rhodes is truly backing down." Lucas looked between father and daughter, clearly taken aback by the turn of events. "I appreciate the offer, but no buts," Thomas said firmly. "Unless you've got pressing business elsewhere, consider yourself hired. We can't pay much, but you'll have room and board and honest work." After a moment's hesitation, Lucas nodded. "Thank you. I accept, at least until I'm sure Rhodes is keeping his end of the bargain." Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. "Good man. Now let's get some breakfast. I don't know about you two, but confrontations always leave me starving." As they walked back to the house, Tessa fell into step beside Lucas. "Thank you," she said quietly for his ears alone. He glanced down at her. "For what?" "For everything. Saving me, standing up to Rhodes, giving us a fresh start." Lucas's expression softened. "You don't need to thank me, Tessa. Some things are worth fighting for." The look in his eyes as he said, it made her heart beat faster, and she found herself wondering if he meant more than just justice. The next few days established a new routine at the Triple D. Lucas proved to be a hard worker, rising before dawn and often continuing until sunset. He helped mend fences, move cattle to better grazing lands, and repair the roof of the barn that had been leaking for months. The other hands quickly came to respect his quiet competence, and even Milo, initially suspicious of the newcomer, grudgingly admitted that Lucas knew his way around a ranch. Tessa found herself watching him more often than she cared to admit. There was something compelling about the way he moved, with economical grace and purpose. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, but when he did, people listened. And sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, a shadow would cross his face, the weight of his past temporarily visible before he masked it again. A week after Rhodes's visit, Tessa was working in the vegetable garden when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she was surprised to see Margaret Rhodes riding toward the house, alone and dressed in a simple riding habit rather than her usual finery. Tessa set aside her trowel and brushed dirt from her hands as Margaret dismounted. "Miss Rhodes," she greeted cautiously, "this is unexpected." Margaret offered a tentative smile. "Miss Davis, I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to speak with Marshal, with Mr. Lawson, if he's available." "He's out checking the north fence line," Tessa replied. "He should be back for the midday meal in about an hour." Margaret hesitated. "Would you mind if I waited? It's rather important." Curiosity overcame wariness. "Of course. Would you like some coffee or tea?" "Tea would be lovely, thank you." Tessa led her visitor into the house, acutely aware of the contrast between Margaret's polished appearance and the humble surroundings of the ranch house. Rosa raised her eyebrows at the sight of Jasper Rhodes's daughter in her kitchen, but set about preparing tea without comment. "You have a charming home," Margaret said, seemingly genuine in her compliment. "Thank you. It's not as grand as your father's place, I'm sure, but it's home." Margaret's smile faded slightly. "Grand, yes. Home, I'm not so certain." An awkward silence fell as Rosa served them tea and left discreetly. Tessa studied the other woman over the rim of her cup. Margaret Rhodes was beautiful in a conventional way: blonde hair, blue eyes, delicate features, but there was an intelligence in her gaze that suggested she was more than just a wealthy man's ornamental daughter. "May I ask how you know Mr. Lawson?" Tessa finally ventured. Margaret set down her cup. "We met in Denver about 3 years ago. My father had business there and I accompanied him. Marshal Lawson, he was a marshal, then attended many of the same social functions." "You were friends?" A faint blush colored Margaret's cheeks. "We were. Friendly. He was different from the other men I knew. Less interested in my father's money, more interested in justice and doing what was right. It was refreshing." Tessa felt an irrational pang of jealousy at the fondness in Margaret's voice. "I see." "I was surprised to find him here," Margaret continued, seemingly oblivious to Tessa's discomfort. "After what happened in Denver, I thought he'd left law enforcement entirely." "He did," Tessa confirmed. "He's been tracking your father for 2 years." Margaret's expression grew troubled. "Yes, I gathered as much from their conversation. My father hasn't been forthcoming about his business dealings, but I'm not naive. I know there are aspects of his wealth that wouldn't bear close scrutiny." Before Tessa could respond, the door opened and Lucas entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. He stopped short at the sight of Margaret, surprise evident on his face. "Miss Rhodes," he greeted her with a nod. "I didn't expect to see you here." Margaret stood. "Mr. Lawson." "I hope you don't mind my intrusion. I needed to speak with you." "Of course." His gaze flicked to Tessa, a silent question in his eyes. "I'll leave you two to talk," Tessa said, rising from her chair. "Rosa needs help with dinner preparations anyway." "No, please stay," Margaret said quickly. "What I have to say concerns the Davis family as well." She took a deep breath. "My father is preparing to leave Wyoming as you demanded. He's selling his holdings and making arrangements to return to Chicago." Lucas nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'm glad to hear it." "However," Margaret continued, "I've discovered something that may be of interest to you. While helping him organize his papers, I found documents regarding his dealings with several local ranchers, including Mr. Davis." She withdrew a folded packet from her reticule. "These are the original loan agreements and promissory notes. I thought you should have them." Lucas accepted the packet, leafing through the papers with growing interest. "These show that Rhodes was charging nearly 40% interest on most loans. That's usury." "And illegal," Margaret confirmed. "I also found correspondence suggesting he's been bribing local officials to ignore complaints about his business practices." She hesitated. "I'm not proud of what my father has done, but I believe in making amends where possible." Tessa stared at her in astonishment. "You're betraying your own father." Margaret met her gaze steadily. "I'm choosing right over wrong. My father taught me many things, but his example taught me what kind of person I don't want to be." Lucas studied her for a long moment. This couldn't have been an easy decision. "No," Margaret agreed softly, "but necessary. I won't be returning to Chicago with him. I've decided to stay in Wyoming, at least for now. I've grown fond of this territory, despite the circumstances that brought me here." Something unspoken passed between Margaret and Lucas, a history that Tessa could sense but not fully understand. She felt suddenly like an intruder, despite being in her own home. "These will help ensure your father keeps his word," Lucas said finally, holding up the documents. "Thank you." Margaret smiled, relief evident in her expression. I should go. Father doesn't know I've come here and he'll be suspicious if I'm gone too long. She turned to Tessa. Thank you for your hospitality, Miss Davis. Despite our family's history, I hope we might be friends someday. Tessa, touched by the sincerity in Margaret's voice, found herself nodding. I'd like that. After Margaret had departed, Tessa and Lucas stood in awkward silence, the packet of documents between them like a physical manifestation of all that remained unsaid. She seems nice, Tessa ventured finally. Lucas glanced at her, a flicker of amusement crossing his features. She is. Her father never deserved her. Were you and she? Tessa left the question unfinished, immediately regretting her boldness. No, Lucas replied simply. Though perhaps in another life, things might have been different. He looked down at the papers in his hand. These change things. With proof of Rhodes's illegal activities, we can ensure he never troubles this region again. Tessa nodded, relieved both by his answer and the change of subject. Will you take them to the authorities? Once Rhodes is gone, yes, but not before. I don't want to risk him using his connections to wriggle out of this. Lucas set the papers aside. For now, it's enough to know we have them. Their conversation was interrupted by Rosa announcing that dinner was ready. As they moved to the table, Lucas's hand brushed Tessa's, perhaps accidentally, perhaps not. The brief contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with static electricity, and everything to do with the growing awareness between them. Over the following weeks, life at the Triple D settled into a new rhythm. True to Margaret's word, Jasper Rhodes began liquidating his holdings. The neighboring ranchers who had also been in his debt found their promissory notes suddenly returned, marked paid in full. Rumors swirled throughout the county about Rhodes's unexpected change of heart, with some attributing it to religious conversion and others to terminal illness. Only a handful of people knew the truth, and they kept their own counsel. Lucas remained at the Triple D, his temporary position gradually evolving into something more permanent. He and Thomas spent evenings discussing improvements to the ranch, a new irrigation system to mitigate the effects of drought, selective breeding to strengthen their herd, potential markets for their cattle beyond the local buyers. With Rhodes's debt erased, the Davis family could finally focus on building rather than merely surviving. As for Tessa and Lucas, their relationship evolved as well, though neither would have been able to define exactly what it was becoming. They worked side by side during the day, their initial awkwardness giving way to comfortable familiarity. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged in unexpected moments. He discovered her passion for books, especially the adventure novels that offered glimpses of worlds beyond the Wyoming frontier. In the evenings, they often sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. Sometimes they talked about her childhood on the ranch, his years as a lawman, their hopes for the future. Other times they simply existed in companionable silence, the space between them charged with unspoken possibilities. One such evening, nearly a month after Rhodes's confrontation at the ranch, Lucas broke their comfortable quiet with an unexpected announcement. Rhodes is leaving tomorrow. Train to Chicago departs at noon. Tessa turned to look at him, the fading light gilding his profile. How do you know? Margaret sent word. He held up a folded note. Came with one of their ranch hands this afternoon while you were in town. So it's over, Tessa said softly. He's actually going. Lucas nodded. Seems that way. A knot formed in Tessa's stomach as she realized what this might mean. With Rhodes gone, Lucas's purpose for staying at the Triple D was fulfilled. He could move on, continue the wandering life he'd led before their paths crossed. What will you do now? She asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Lucas was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. I've been asking myself the same question. For 2 years, finding roads has been my only goal. I never really thought about what would come after. You could return to law enforcement, Tessa suggested, though the thought of him leaving made her heart ache. I'm sure your experience would be valued. Perhaps. He didn't sound convinced, or I could stay here. Tessa's pulse quickened. Here, if I'm welcome. Lucas turned to face her fully. Your father mentioned yesterday that he could use a foreman. Milo's getting older, thinking about retiring to live with his daughter in Laramie. And you're interested. Tessa couldn't quite keep the hope from her voice. I've grown fond of this place, Lucas said carefully. The land, the people. The people, a smile touched his lips. One person in particular. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibilities. Tessa was acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth radiating from him in the cool evening air. Lucas, she began, but words failed her. He saved her from having to find them. With gentle deliberation, he reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers enveloping hers. I've spent 2 years looking backward, Tessa, chasing justice, dwelling on past failures. But these past weeks, for the first time in a long while, I've started looking forward instead. And what do you see? She whispered. Possibilities. His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. A future that doesn't revolve around vengeance, a place where I might belong. You belong here, Tessa said with sudden certainty. With us. With me. Lucas's eyes, those storm cloud gray eyes that had first caught her attention a month ago, darkened with emotion. Are you sure about that? My past isn't exactly. I don't care about your past, Tessa interrupted. I care about who you are now, the man who saved me from outlaws, who stood up to Rhodes, who works from sunrise to sunset without complaint, who listens to my father's stories even when he's told them 3 times before. A genuine smile spread across Lucas's face. They're good stories, especially the one about the bear and the honey pot. Tessa laughed, the tension of the moment breaking. That one improves with each telling. Lucas's expression grew serious again. Tessa, I need you to understand something. I'm not a perfect man. I've made mistakes, done things I'm not proud of. Who hasn't? She replied softly. Most people haven't spent 2 years obsessively tracking a man across 3 territories. Most people don't have the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it costs them everything. Tessa squeezed his hand. I don't want a perfect man, Lucas. I just want you. The naked honesty of her words hung in the air between them. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Lucas leaned forward, his free hand coming up to cradle her cheek and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative at first, as though he expected her to pull away. But Tessa leaned into him, her hand finding his shoulder, and the kiss deepened. His lips were warm and firm against hers, and she could taste the coffee he'd had after dinner, feel the slight scratch of stubble against her skin. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that for weeks, he admitted. Why didn't you? Tessa asked, not moving away from him. I wasn't sure if my feelings were welcome or appropriate given the circumstances of how we met, Tessa smiled. Most love stories don't begin with outlaws and rifles, it's true. Love. Lucas pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. Tessa felt her cheeks warm but held his gaze. Yes, love. At least that's what I'm beginning to feel. If it's too soon to say that, Lucas silenced her with another kiss, briefer but no less heartfelt. It's not too soon. Not for how I feel about you. From inside the house, Thomas called Tessa's name, the moment between them gently interrupted. We should go in, Tessa said reluctantly. Pa will wonder where we are. Lucas nodded, releasing her hand but staying close as they stood. "I'll speak to him tomorrow, about the foreman position and other matters." Tessa raised an eyebrow. "Other matters?" "My intentions toward his daughter," Lucas clarified, a hint of nervousness in his voice that Tessa found endearing from a man who had faced down armed outlaws without flinching. "I think he'll be amenable to both discussions," Tessa assured him, her heart light with happiness. "He already considers you family, you know." Lucas's expression softened. "Family? I'd like that." Hand in hand, they walked back into the house, where light and warmth awaited them. The following day dawned clear and crisp, with the first hint of autumn in the air. Lucas rose early, as was his habit, but found Thomas already at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee and reading a month-old newspaper from Cheyenne. "Morning," Thomas greeted him. "Coffee's fresh." "Thank you, sir." Lucas poured himself a cup and sat across from his employer. No time like the present, he thought. "Mr. Davis, I was hoping to speak with you about something important." Thomas folded his newspaper and gave Lucas his full attention. "I'm listening." "Two things, actually." Lucas took a breath. "First, I'd like to accept your offer to take over as foreman when Milo retires." A smile creased Thomas's weathered face. "Good. I was hoping you would. Milo speaks highly of you, says you know more about cattle than most men who have ranched their whole lives." "I grew up on a small spread in Colorado," Lucas explained. "Before I joined the Marshals." Thomas nodded. "And the second matter," Lucas set down his coffee cup, suddenly dry-mouthed despite the liquid he'd just swallowed. "It concerns your daughter, sir." "I thought it might." Thomas's expression was unreadable. "I have feelings for Tessa, strong feelings, and I hope she returns them." Lucas met the older man's gaze directly. "I'm asking your permission to court her properly." Thomas studied him for a long moment. "You're a good man, Lawson. Better than most who have come sniffing around my daughter over the years. But I need to know your intentions are serious. Tessa deserves someone who'll stay the course, not a drifter who'll disappear at the first sign of trouble." "My drifting days are over," Lucas said firmly. "I want to build something here, with your family, with Tessa if she'll have me." "And what about your past? Rhodes is leaving today, but there might be others out there with grudges against a former lawman." Lucas nodded, acknowledging the concern. "There's always that risk. But I've made peace with most of my past. Rhodes was the last loose end, the one that kept me from moving forward. Now that's resolved." Thomas took a thoughtful sip of coffee. "Tessa's strong-willed, gets that from her mother. Once she sets her mind on something or someone, there's no changing it." He smiled slightly. "I've seen how she looks at you, son. I suspect my permission is a formality at this point." Relief washed through Lucas. "Thank you, sir. I promise you I'll do right by her. See that you do." Thomas's voice held a hint of steel beneath the genial tone. "Now, let's talk about more practical matters. If you're going to be foreman, you'll need proper quarters. The bunkhouse is no place for a man in your position." Lucas started to protest that he was comfortable enough, but Thomas waved him off. "There's that old cabin near the east pasture. My father built it when he first claimed this land. It needs work, but it's solid. 2 rooms, a decent fireplace, could be made comfortable with some effort." "That's very generous," Lucas began. "It's practical," Thomas corrected. "A foreman should have his own place, and eventually—" He let the implication hang in the air. "Well, one step at a time." The conversation shifted to ranch business, but Lucas's mind kept returning to the cabin. A home of his own, on land he was coming to love, with a future bright with promise. It was more than he had dared hope for when he'd first picked up Jasper Rhodes's trail 2 years ago. Later that morning, Lucas rode into town with the packet of documents Margaret had provided. Rhodes's train would be leaving in 2 hours, and Lucas wanted to witness his departure personally, to be certain the man actually left Wyoming. The small town of Silver Creek was busier than usual, word of Rhodes's departure having spread rapidly. The wealthy rancher had been a divisive figure feared by many, but also an important customer for local businesses. Outside the station, his luggage was being loaded into the baggage car while Rhodes himself stood on the platform, giving instructions to the porter. Lucas dismounted and tethered his horse at the hitching post, then walked toward the station, the incriminating papers secure in his inside pocket. As he approached, Rhodes spotted him and his florid face darkened. "Lawson," he acknowledged coldly. "Come to make sure I'm leaving, I suppose." "Something like that." Lucas stopped a few paces away, conscious of the curious onlookers nearby. "You're doing the right thing, Rhodes," the older man snorted. "The coerce thing, you mean. Don't mistake this for moral reformation." "Where's Margaret?" Lucas asked, noting her absence. A flicker of pain crossed Rhodes's features. "She's not coming. Decided to stay at the ranch, at least for now. Says she needs independence and time to consider her future." His scowl deepened. "I suppose I have you to thank for that as well. Margaret makes her own decisions," Lucas replied. "She always has. She was the one who gave you those documents, wasn't she?" It wasn't really a question. "My own daughter." Lucas neither confirmed nor denied it. "You raised an intelligent woman with a strong moral compass. That's to your credit. Cold comfort." Rhodes checked his pocket watch. 10 minutes until departure. "Is there something else you wanted, or are you just here to gloat?" "Insurance." Lucas patted his jacket where the documents lay. "These stay with me until I'm certain you won't be returning. After that, what happens to them depends on your future behavior." Rhodes's eyes narrowed. "Blackmail, Marshal? I thought you were a man of principle." "Just practicality. Stay away from Wyoming, and these papers never see the light of day. Try to return or send your men back to cause trouble, and they go straight to the territorial governor and every newspaper west of the Mississippi." Lucas allowed himself a small smile. "As you said, I'm no longer a marshal. I can be pragmatic." The station master called for passengers to board. Rhodes hesitated, then extended his hand in a gesture that clearly cost him some pride. "I underestimated you, Lawson. A mistake I won't make again." Lucas accepted the handshake briefly. "See that you don't. Goodbye, Rhodes." As the train pulled away from the station in a cloud of steam and coal smoke, Lucas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The burden of vengeance he'd carried for 2 years finally set down. Donovan's murder would never see justice in a courtroom, but his killer would never harm another person in Wyoming Territory. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Lucas was so lost in thought that he almost missed the familiar figure standing at the edge of the platform, Margaret Rhodes, watching her father's train disappear around the bend. "Miss Rhodes," he called, approaching her. "I didn't expect to see you here." Margaret turned, a sad smile on her lips. "I couldn't let him leave without saying goodbye. Despite everything, he is my father. Of course." Lucas stood beside her, both of them watching the last wisps of smoke dissipate. "He mentioned you're staying behind." "Yes." Margaret straightened her shoulders. "I've decided to manage the ranch myself, at least for now. Father has agreed to transfer the deed to my name before he reaches Chicago." Lucas raised his eyebrows in surprise. "That's progressive of him. He owes me that much at least." Her blue eyes met his. "I may sell eventually, but not until I've proven to myself, if no one else, that I can make my own way." "I think you'll do fine." Lucas meant it. There was a determination in Margaret that reminded him in some ways of Tessa. "Thank you." She hesitated. "And how are things at the Davis ranch?" With Miss Davis, the question held a depth of meaning that didn't escape Lucas. "Good, very good. I've accepted a permanent position there, as foreman, Margaret nodded, something like wistful understanding in her expression. I'm glad. You deserve happiness, Lucas. After everything that happened in Denver, you deserve a fresh start. So do you, he replied gently. Perhaps we'll see each other occasionally, neighboring ranchers and all that. Her smile turned teasing. Though I suspect Miss Davis might not appreciate that too much. Lucas felt his cheeks warm. Tessa isn't the jealous type. Every woman is the jealous type about the right man, Margaret replied with surprising insight. But she needn't worry. What might have been between us belongs to a different time, a different life. Before Lucas could respond to that remarkably candid statement, Margaret continued, I should go. I have a ranch to learn how to run. She offered her hand. Goodbye, Marshal Lawson. Just Lucas now, he reminded her, taking her hand briefly. Goodbye, Margaret, and good luck. As he rode back to the Triple D, Lucas felt as though he'd closed not just one chapter of his life, but an entire book. Ahead lay blank pages, waiting to be filled with new stories, and at the center of those stories, a woman with courage in her heart and sunshine in her smile. He found Tessa in the garden, harvesting late summer vegetables for Rosa's stew pot. She looked up as he approached, her face lighting with a smile that made his heart skip. He's gone, she asked, setting aside her basket and brushing soil from her hands. On the eastbound train, Lucas confirmed. I don't think we'll be seeing Jasper roads in these parts again. Good. Tessa studied his face. How do you feel? It was a simple question that required a complex answer. Lucas considered it carefully. Lighter, as though I've been carrying a heavy pack for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like not to bear the weight. Tessa nodded in understanding. And now? What comes next for Lucas Lawson? Well, he said, moving closer to her, I had a talk with your father this morning. 2 talks, actually. Oh, her expression was carefully neutral, but he could see the hope in her eyes. The first was about accepting the position as foreman. He's offered me that cabin by the east pasture, says it needs work, but it's solid. Tessa's smile widened. It's a good cabin. I used to play there as a child. The views of the mountains at sunset are beautiful. I'll need to see for myself, Lucas said softly. Perhaps you could show me later. I'd be happy to. She hesitated. And the second talk? Lucas took her hands in his, marveling at how perfectly they fit together despite the differences, his large and rough from work and weather, hers smaller but equally calloused from years of ranch life. The second talk was about you, he said simply. About us. I asked your father's permission to court you properly. Tessa's eyes widened. You did. What did he say? He said yes. Lucas couldn't help smiling at her evident delight. With the condition that my intentions be honorable and permanent. And are they? Honorable and permanent? Tessa asked, her voice teasing but with an undertone of genuine question. In answer, Lucas leaned down and kissed her, there among the tomato vines and late summer squash, with the afternoon sun warming their shoulders and the scent of earth and growing things surrounding them. Completely honorable, he murmured against her lips. Absolutely permanent. Tessa smiled into the kiss, her arms sliding around his neck. Good. Because I've grown rather attached to having you around, Lucas Lawson. Even better, he replied, holding her close, because I'm not going anywhere. Later that afternoon, they rode out to inspect the cabin, which was indeed solid but in need of attention after years of use as a storage place for tack and tools. Lucas surveyed the sagging porch, the shutters hanging from broken hinges, the chimney that would need cleaning. It'll take work, he admitted, but it has potential. Tessa, who had been exploring inside, emerged with a thoughtful expression. The roof is sound. The floor needs some new boards and the whole place could use a good scrubbing, but it's not as bad as I feared. Lucas watched her, struck again by her practical nature, her resilience, her beauty that owed nothing to artifice and everything to the spirit that shone from within her. "What?" she asked, noticing his gaze. "Just thinking that I'm a lucky man," he said honestly. Tessa laughed, the sound echoing across the open land. Saved from outlaws by a former lawman who then saves the family ranch from financial ruin and now plans to fix up an old cabin by himself. "I'd say I'm the lucky one." Lucas shook his head. "The way I see it, we both got a second chance. At life, at happiness." He took her hand, drawing her closer. "I don't intend to waste it." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, they stood together on the porch of what would soon be a home. In the distance, cattle grazed on Triple D land, secure in the knowledge that the worst of the drought had passed. From this vantage point, Lucas could see the main house and outbuildings where Thomas Davis had built a legacy for his daughter, and now, perhaps, for the generations that would follow. "I love you," Lucas said, the words emerging naturally as though they'd always been there, waiting to be spoken. "I think I have since I first saw you, even in the midst of danger." Tessa's eyes shimmered with emotion. "I love you too, Lucas, more than I thought possible." As their lips met again, sealing promises that went beyond words, Lucas knew with unshakable certainty that his wandering days were over. Here, with this woman on this land, he had found not just a place to belong, but a future worth building one day, one moment, one kiss at a time. In the months that followed, the Triple D flourished under the combined efforts of Thomas, Tessa, and Lucas. The autumn cattle drive to Cheyenne brought better prices than anticipated, providing capital for the improvements Lucas had suggested. Winter arrived with heavy snows but found the ranch well prepared, with full hay barns and livestock moved to sheltered pastures. Lucas worked tirelessly on the cabin through the fall, with help from Thomas and the other hands. By the first snowfall, it was habitable, the roof reinforced, the chimney cleaned, new glass in the windows and fresh boards on the porch. Inside, Tessa had contributed her own touches. Curtains sewn from fabric purchased in town, a quilt for the bed, and a small shelf of books that included Lucas's favorite Dickens novel, discovered during one of their evening conversations. Their courtship progressed with the steady assurance of two people who had found in each other not just love but partnership. They shared work and leisure, dreams and occasional disagreements, always coming back to the fundamental truth of their connection. As winter gave way to spring, and new calves dotted the greening pastures, Lucas knew it was time to take the next step. On a perfect May evening, with the mountains silhouetted against a sky aflame with sunset, he asked Tessa to be his wife. Her tearful yes was followed by a celebration that brought together the entire ranch community. From Thomas's bare hugs to Rosa's joyful preparations of a feast to Milo's gruff congratulations. Even Margaret Rhodes sent a note of good wishes, along with a silver serving platter that demonstrated both her genuine happiness for them and her understanding of proper social gestures. They were married in June, in the small church in Silver Creek, with Thomas proudly walking his daughter down the aisle to where Lucas waited, scarcely able to believe his good fortune. Tessa wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered by Rosa's skilled hands, and carried wildflowers gathered from the meadow where Lucas had first told her he loved her. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to cherish and support each other through whatever life might bring. As they sealed those promises with a kiss, Lucas felt the final pieces of his past settling into place, not forgotten, but transformed from burdens into the experiences that had led him to this moment, this woman, this life. The celebration afterward at the Triple D lasted well into the night, with music and dancing, food and laughter. When the last guest had departed, Lucas took his bride home to the cabin that they now would share, carrying her across the threshold as tradition demanded. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," he said softly, setting her on her feet in the main room where a fire waited to warm the cool June night. Tessa's eyes shone in the firelight as she looked up at him. "I like the sound of that. So do I." Lucas cupped her face in his hands, still amazed that this extraordinary woman had chosen to share her life with him. "I promise you, Tessa, I'll spend every day making sure you never regret it." Her smile was radiant as she reached up to loosen his tie. "I know you will, and I'll do the same." Her voice dropped to a whisper as she added, "Starting tonight." Later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilt she had made, watching moonlight spill through the window, Lucas reflected on the twisting path that had brought him to this place of contentment. From the pain of losing his friend, through the dark years of pursuit, to the moment he had seen Tessa being dragged toward the trees, each step, however difficult, had been necessary to reach this culmination. "What are you thinking about?" Tessa asked, her head resting on his chest, her hair spilling across his skin like silk. "How strange life is," Lucas replied, running his fingers through the dark waves. "How a moment of violence led to this peace. How seeking justice brought me to love instead." Tessa propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Do you ever regret it? Giving up your badge, spending those years tracking roads?" Lucas considered the question carefully. "I regret that Donovan died, that Rhodes will never face a court for his crimes." His hand traced the curve of her cheek. "But I can't regret anything that led me to you, to us." She smiled, leaning down to kiss him. "Then it was all worthwhile." "More than worthwhile," he agreed. "It was destiny." Tessa laughed softly. "I didn't take you for a believer in fate, Lucas Lawson." "I wasn't," he admitted. "Until I saw you and everything changed." As they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, Lucas knew that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together. The darkness of his past had given way to the brightness of this new beginning, a life built on love, trust, and the promise of tomorrows stretching endlessly before them. And it had all begun with Outlaws, a rifle and 7 words that had changed the course of 2 lives forever. "That's far enough,"